All right, everybody, welcome back to the next episode of my NHL Deep Dive series. Once again, we have another guest. Um, what video did you do? You did Detroit,
The Red
right?
Wings video, yeah.
Yeah, that video went over great. Um, and we're here to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning. So yeah, Jack's back, and he writes about the Lightning. So uh, he's more of a traditional guest that I've had on this series. Somebody that covers the team rather than just um, the Red Wings video, which was obviously not I guess you're not as close to the Red Wings as you are to the Lightning, is what I'm trying to say. Um, but yeah, we're gonna jump into the Tampa Bay Lightning's offseason moves, and it was a pretty turbulent offseason for them. A lot of changes. We just did Nashville, so these teams are kind of interlinked, obviously, with the big uh, departure for the Lightning. But offensively, they bring in Connor Geeky, who I'm adding because I think he's going to have an opportunity to make the team this year. They bring in Jake Gensel, obviously, which is the big addition they made. Yessu Lennon, Gergensons, and Cam Atkinson. They obviously lose Steven Stamkos. That's the biggest departure, maybe in general across the league, just for his impact to the team. They also lose Anthony Duclair. They only really had post trade deadline. Tyler Mott, Austin Watson, Tanner Jeannot, and ABB gone as well. So it's kind of a wash, I guess, talent wise, um, for this team. If you take into the fact that like Anthony Duclair was only there for like 2 months, but I'm curious to see like what your thoughts are on the departure of Steven Stamkos specifically, and kind of how they plan on replacing what he brought, both on the ice but also just in a leadership role. Obviously, they named Victor Hedman captain like 2 days ago, but we'll see. Like it's still a pretty significant loss, just for, I mean, him being in the conversation for the greatest Tampa Bay Lightning player of all time.
Yeah, I think the loss is significantly big, especially off the ice and around the city of Tampa Bay. Just sort of being here and in the area, you can really tell that fans are affected by it. And it's really sad to see Stamkos gone after such a great career here, obviously bringing two Stanley Cups. And like you said, I think it's truly a wash with these new forwards coming in and the ones leaving. But I think the dynamic of this team changes greatly with Gensel in place at Stamkos, mainly on the power play, and then at 5-on-5 with Gensel's new line mates in Point and Kucherov.
Yeah, it's gonna be really fun to see him play with some more dynamic players. Obviously, we saw what he did with Sidney Crosby the last couple of years, and he was one of the best wingers in hockey. So, playing with guys like Point and Kucherov are definitely going to let him truly flourish as a winger. I think it's going to be a big season for. I expect a big season for Jake Hensel this year. Moving on to the blue line, they bring in Ryan McDonough, so he's back. JJ Moser also gets brought in. They lose Calvin DeHaan, Hayden Fleury, Matt Dumba, who they had as deadline acquisition as well, and of course Mikhail Sergachev, which was the other big departure that this team had. Another one of those core pieces on this team, and obviously, like they replace him in role this year with Ryan McDonough, but losing kind of a younger player like that and replacing him with an aging player like McDonough kind of shortens this team's window, I guess, in a way, at least on the blue line. How do you kind of see McDonough factoring into this blue line, and how are they going to be able to replace what Mikhail Sergachev was kind of growing into? Because he did see some pretty drastic development, especially over the last couple of years uh, in Tampa.
Yeah, so the McDonough coming back here is big for a couple of reasons. First off, he's going to be paired with Eric Chernak again, who
Yeah.
signed that massive 8-year deal following the Stanley Cup runs. And the past two seasons have been horrendous for him in terms of injuries and overall play. He just hasn't been a $5 million defenseman. And bringing back his partner, who truly made him be that top four defenseman and worth that money, I think is going to be huge. And on top of that, you're now taking the pressure off Victor Hedman on that top pairing. So you're going to be able to throw McDonough and Chernak out there against opponents' top sixes, first lines, power play units, and you're going to give Hedman the easier minutes coming up this year. As with guys like Sergachev, who was injured last year, Hedman ended up playing a bigger role than he should have at his age. And I think that ultimately showed in his defensive results. So having McDonough back is going to be big. The city loves him. There's signs everywhere for him being back already, which you'd be surprised about because Tampa's not really you don't really think of that as a hockey city, but it's really grown a lot over here. So
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially after all the success they've had, and even Florida too. Like that's going to rub off a little bit on the surrounding cities and stuff too. Just that state in general has had so much insane. Like what it's the last five Stanley Cup Finals they've been to as a
yeah,
state. So and they've won three of them. So like yeah, it's pretty. It's Tampa's or Florida, I guess, is the new Boston in terms of sports success that they've had over the last couple of years in general, but specifically hockey wise. Um, Jumping into the four, obviously no changes in net. Jumping into the forwards, obviously, I mean, we just talked about Jake Gensel and Braden Point being one of the. I still think Braden Point's underrated. Like, he doesn't really get brought up a lot in the conversation as like one of the best centers in the NHL, but like he really is. Like Braden Point's been awesome for the last couple of years, and obviously Nikita Kucherov's there, who's another one of my A+ players. As we move higher up the rankings, obviously there's been more of them. Um, but like that top line, I expect pretty big things from them. I think Jake Gensel adds a wrinkle to that line that maybe Stamkos didn't, in terms of like being able to be more of a dynamic play driver. I think Stamkos kind of lost a bit of that over the last couple of years and was just kind of turning more into like just the pure scorer on this line. I think Gensel adds like a pretty good dynamic game that I think should pair really well with Point and Kucherov and really open the ice up for all three of them. Uh, I think that this line, especially with Joe Pavelski retiring in Dallas, this line could be in contention for the best line in the NHL going into this season. I'm curious to kind of see what the vibe is around Tampa Bay in concerning with these three.
yeah. I mean, it's going to be exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. First day of training camp today. The three of them are already paired together, and Gensel adds that versatility to this first line that Stamkos maybe doesn't bring anymore. Over the past 2 years, his play driving numbers have fell off quite a bit. He obviously had that career high over 100 points in 2022
Yeah,
with Kucherov injured. And I'm really excited to see this line together. Moving down the depth chart, another guy I really like is Brandon Hagel, who really had a
yeah,
great season last year. He was honestly the most consistent Lightning player outside of Kucherov. And he's now up in your A- rating here, which I see, which is a first liner. And I have high expectations for him. And I hope to see him get some power play minutes next year with Stamkos out of here. So,
yeah. No, he's somebody who I think is definitely a kind of an X factor for this kind of core, I guess, four forwards. Um, because if he can build off the season he had last year, like you're talking about a very good group of four forwards here in Tampa Bay, and I think that's important because I don't know if this team has I mean, Tampa's depth offensively has always been declining basically since the cup runs. And I think this might be the worst bottom six that they've put together over that, like basically since they won the first Stanley Cup. And like outside of Nick Paul, who is a pretty solid third line center, he'd be one of the better third line centers in the NHL. There isn't a ton here that like I love. Connor Sherry is somebody who's bounced around and has looked fine and kind of playing that third line role. But other than that, there isn't a ton on this bottom six that really excites me. Which is why I think somebody like a Connor Geeky could be a really interesting player um, to get an opportunity in this bottom six because he can add kind of that secondary scoring, and at least you hope he can add that secondary scoring and kind of be a like an energy kind of spark plug player in a bottom six that I think kind of lacks that scoring touch, at least that Tampa has had in the past. Like when you talk about like the Yanni Gords and the Blake Colemans of the world that they've had in this bottom six for so long, it, it seems to kind of be lacking that touch a little bit. And even like a Yessu Lennon, who is somebody, I mean, as a Canadians fan, like I loved Yessu Lennon and in the bottom six roles that he played. He's somebody else that I think could get a good shot here and kind of add a bit more of that dynamic energy to this bottom six. But how do you kind of see this bottom of the lineup offensively turning out for Tampa?
yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely going to be a revolving door here with this bottom six. I think there's going to be multiple guys getting opportunities this season. Some like Geeky, another guy, Logan Brown, who was injured all of
Yeah,
last year. He's 6'6". He's massive. He could be a guy that comes in and potentially plays a role. And with Luke Glendening and Mike Asimont hurt to start the season, they're supposed to be back for opening night, but we shall see there. Gergensons is a guy they added in the offseason for
Yeah.
relatively cheap, who I don't mind. He's played his whole career in Buffalo, so maybe he has a little untapped potential there. And I think you'll see more guys kind of similar to Mitchell Chafee's story last year, who just kind of come onto the scene halfway through the season and end up sticking. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what John Cooper does is he gives guys opportunities and whatever sticks, he just rolls with. So definitely a weak bottom six. One of the worst in the NHL, maybe. It's definitely down there. So
Especially for like the teams that I've been covering the last little bit, I definitely think it's maybe the worst group that we've seen in a little bit. I don't know if I'd say it's in the box. I think somebody like a Nick Paul and Connor Sherry kind of do enough to get them above that tier. I guess Cam Atkinson you could flip for Nick Paul as like the sixth if you're going to take their six worst
yeah.
um forwards in that case. But yeah, definitely like in terms of like the kind of like deep playoff contenders is kind of
Yeah.
the group that we're in now. It's definitely one of the worst group of six players that we've seen in a little bit, and it definitely will be uh one of the worst going forward. So
Yeah. So that top 16, that playoff sort of realm of teams, I think this is one of the lower
yeah,
end bottom sixes for
for
sure.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, like you said, like John Cooper is very good at finding and plugging players into roles that are going to fit. And if there's a coach that I would want in charge of this bottom six, it would be John Cooper, especially with all the talent that they're going to have in that top six. And again, like if Jake Gensel can figure it out with that top line, you might be looking at one of the best first lines in the NHL, if not the best first line in the NHL. And then if somebody like Brandon Hagel can continue the success that he had last year, then all of a sudden they might be able to outscore a lot of the problems that their bottom six is going to cause. So moving on to the blue line here, it's another interesting unit because obviously we talked about Ryan McDonough kind of being able to take some of that pressure off Victor Hedman. Victor Hedman's somebody who we've seen start to decline, and I know a lot of Lightning fans don't want to talk about it, and they still want him to be in that like A plus best defenseman in the world category, and he hasn't been the last couple years, regardless of why that is. It's just the fact is that he hasn't been, and he's still good enough to be in the A's. So that's that's where he lives right now. But other than that, like there's a lot of the blue line. Just looking at like ratings wise, doesn't look great. But I think there's a lot of very interesting players here that could really have solid seasons. I think JJ Moser is somebody who has shown flashes of being a very productive defenseman, and maybe a lot of his issues were just being in Arizona and kind of being in that environment. Taylor Radish is again or Darren Radish, sorry, is somebody who has looked again has shown flashes of being a top four defenseman, and it's just consistency at this point. Eric Chernak again is somebody who 2 years ago probably would have been in the B pluses for me, but a couple bad seasons and this is where he is. But again, playing with a Ryan McDonough might be able to turn that around, and obviously Nick Perbix is another player who is again has shown instances of looking like a legitimate top four defenseman. So all throughout this lineup, I like it's a lot of potential with these guys, and I think the biggest thing for this unit is just can they extract that and can they find consistency? At least for me, but there's a lot of moving pieces I think on this blue line as of right now.
Yeah, this blue line's really interesting for me. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I think the only real guaranteed thing that we're going to see for throughout most of the season is Ryan McDonough paired with Eric Chernak. We know the success
Yeah,
they've had, which we touched on earlier. But again, Victor Hedman's partner right now is wide open. You have three different options there in Radish, Moser, who's a left-handed guy who can play his offside, and Nick Perbix. Perbix and Radish have experience with Hedman. Radish did a little bit better of a job with Hedman last season compared to Perbix. But again, these are all guys who have some pop to their game and can honestly be absolutely anything, and they have high ceilings here for Tampa Bay. So it'll be interesting. It's just whoever's going to step up and rise to the occasion, and that's who John Cooper's going to play once again here, similar to the bottom six, in my opinion. Just a revolving door. Whoever's having the best night is going to get the opportunity. So
yeah. We just recently, I mean, we covered Nashville and Vancouver's blue lines, and ratings wise, they're very similar. to Tampa Bay, both of them, but with Tampa being the best, and then Nashville and Vancouver, I believe. Yes, but Tampa seems to have the most upside potential of those three. And then Nashville, and I don't think there's a lot of upside in what Vancouver has going on, but we've talked about that, or I have
Mm.
in a previously, but
Oh
uh,
God.
but like I think there's a lot of pop potential on this blue line, and that's what kind of gets me excited because it as of right now it doesn't grade out great. Um, it's about middle. I haven't found the actual rating for it, but I'm pretty sure it's about little above, slightly above middle of the pack in the NHL. Just looking at eyeballing the list right now, um, but there's potential for this blue line to really take a step up, and I think a lot of that depends. A lot of that is banking on the fact that Victor Hedman not only stays where he is, but also kind of bounces back with McDonough coming in and taking a lot of that pressure off, but also Ryan McDonough not regressing. If those two things don't happen, then I think this blue line at the end of the year grades higher than it does right now. But I think though that's kind of my biggest question right now is like is Victor Hedman going to continue to regress, and is Ryan McDonough going to hit a wall? Because everybody else I think is kind of primed to break out, for lack of a better word. So it's kind of weird that my biggest concern right now is the two best players on this blue line. I'm curious to see if you kind of feel the same way going into this year.
Yeah, so I definitely think that Hedman and McDonough might experience a little bit of regression with age. McDonough's going to be 36 soon, which is crazy that he was able to maintain his top four play last season as a
Oh yeah,
35-year-old. But overall, I think you're looking at a group where you could have potentially all six guys here listed in the B category, like
yeah,
at least B
for
minus or
sure.
B rated, which is really interesting, which is why I'm really excited to watch this blue line in action because you can have Radish, Chernak, Herbix, Moser. Those guys can all end up being bona fide second pairing guys by the end of the season. So
Yeah,
definitely a lot of potential here and a pretty wide, a pretty high floor and a high ceiling on top of that.
yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think this is one of the units I feel the most confident in saying that they'll probably improve by the end of the year. Finally moving into the goaltending. Again, I think people might be a little upset that Vasilevsky's not an A plus. He hasn't been that goalie for the last couple of years. People need to, see that. And but I still think he's really good. I think, he's still one of the top 10 best goalies in the NHL. He's still in that like elite tier of goaltenders. And of course, goalies are random. So like Vasilevsky won the Vezina this year and be like put up the greatest season of all time, and that's just the way it works. Um, Jonas Johansson's back again, somehow still employed into the NHL. He's probably a great guy. I'm not nothing for him personally, but it's just he hasn't. I don't know why this is why teams consistently think is their best option in net.
He held
Um,
the fort down when he
he
needed
did. He
to.
did. He had a couple of good stretches in Tampa. He's definitely looked the best with the Lightning in his stints in Tampa Bay. I'll give him that. But I think he had like one like 2 week crazy run in Colorado at some point too. Um, but I definitely think that like Vasilevsky is going to be asked to carry a lot of the load on this team, and I don't know if he'll get like Connor Hellebucked by the end of the season, where he just kind of hits a wall. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'd be a little concerned about the Vasilevsky's usage, especially with the injury concerns that he's now starting to develop. Is that fair? Like I guess is the question because I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
obviously Vasilevsky's been one of the best goalies in the NHL the last couple of years, but it feels like it might be kind of a turning point in his career.
yeah, I'm just gonna come out hot and say it right out of the gate here that Vasilevsky had the worst season of his career last year, and I think
Yeah,
Lightning fans are aware of that. I've seen definitely some recognition that last year was not a good year for Vasilevsky, and his injury did suck. Jonas Johansson kept the team around a 500 record until his return, and Vasilevsky was kind of hot and cold last season. He had a couple stretches that were amazing. He had a couple stretches where he was cold, but ultimately, I think this upcoming year we'll see some more consistency from him, and I think he's eager to come back now that he's fully healthy. rested, I think he's going to bounce back and probably be in the top five of goals saved above expected this year. And for Johansson, hopefully he can continue to develop. Before last season, he had less than 10 games played of NHL experience, and they threw him in a starting role, which is beyond me. There were guys available on PTOs that they could have looked at, like Yaroslav Lak, but didn't. Anyways, we're going to roll with Johansson and Vasilevsky, but
Yeah.
ultimately expect this tandem to be just fine for the most part, unless Vasilevsky's overworked.
Kevin Lankinen still available.
Oh, all 32 teams should just sign Kevin Lankinen, unless you're the Islanders. Unless you're the Islanders.
Yeah, unless you're the yeah, if you're not the Islanders, then or Washington. I feel pretty confident Washington's tandem. But those are the like if you're not one of those two teams, Kevin Lankinen is available. Apparently he wants more than $1 million though, and that's what's holding him up in Vancouver. But uh who desperately need a backup goalie. Yeah, I mean Andre Vasilevsky 65th in goals saved above expected last year. Obviously, that's including every goalie who's played. I didn't filter anything, so it's probably not that bad because there's a bunch of goalies who played like two games
I think it was in the like the low
at him.
20s.
But yeah, he was in the low 20s if you or something. Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere. Either way, it was not a good season for him. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is if he can bounce back, and this blue line should be able to help him out enough. Even like with the lack of dynamic play in the bottom six, I think they don't really have. There's nobody I'm really worried about defensively. Maybe Gergensons and Glendening, kind of stand out as red flags defensively. But at least Luke and Glendenning's going to win a bunch of faceoffs for you. So there's
Yeah,
that.
you're not even gonna have any shots
Uh,
against when he's on the ice. The other team's not even touching the puck.
So, and I mean, Cam Atkinson is Cam Atkinson, I guess, but like there isn't a ton of like, I don't have a huge concern defense. I mean, John Cooper always seems to have decent defensive numbers anyway, no matter who he's got in there. So it's not like a major concern for me, but I definitely think like if any success the team's going to have is going to be banking on the fact that Andre Vasilevsky can return to at least like most of the form that he was a couple years ago. I think it's unrealistic to say that he's going to turn into the best goalie in the world again, but I don't think they necessarily need that to have a successful year. I mean, this is a team that I think still has to be kind of like just outside of that Stanley Cup bubble, I guess, if you're talking about teams who are like true contenders. But they're definitely like in that realm of conversation. And as is everybody really at this point. I mean, they're the 11th ranked team for a reason going into the season. That's because they still are pretty good. Uh, but yeah, I think that's about it on the Lightning. Um, I guess if you want to plug where everybody can find you, that would be go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm in two locations now. First is my Twitter, just my name, Jack J. Pilata. That's where I post all my articles for the Lightning. I write at the Hockey Writers for them. And then secondly, I just started up on Instagram once again under a new handle called Statistical Stickwork, where I'll be doing mainly just educational stuff for stats and some player breakdowns and stuff like that. So stay tuned for some stuff there. I think we'll get going on that in the coming months. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, there's a very good post on Dylan Strom that's up there now. Now I don't look
Oh,
crazy.
I got
So
it out.
go.
I promised. And which video was it you
This is
said?
Washington. This is Washington. I
Yeah,
called it
okay.
a week ago.
I got it done. I should have clipped it and posted it at the end of the slide. But
But
it's
there
out
you
if you
go.
want to see. It is
It's
up.
finally it's there. But yeah, again, thank you for coming on. I think we're gonna have you on for one more
Yeah, coming back for the
uh
Rangers one.
for the Rangers. Yeah. So look forward to that. And yeah,
That'll be a
again,
good
thank you
one.
for coming
Yeah,
on. And
absolutely.
yeah, we're getting there, guys. We got 10 more of these to go, and I got like 2 weeks. So we're on pace. But it's been a busy month making these videos. Next year, I will be a lot more vigilant about doing these throughout July and August. But that's fine. But yeah, thank you for watching, and make sure you like and subscribe. And the next video should be out pretty soon.
Subscribe.